Okay, Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. I have some issues with streaming on YouTube at the moment. I'm trying to resolve the issue. However, I hope you can watch this live lecture on Twitter and also Facebook. Inshallah, I will also upload this video soon on YouTube once this live lecture is done. Please make dua that I'm able to solve the issue and that we can also live stream on YouTube as well. Last week we didn't have any online lectures. I asked you to read an article. I hope you have read that article. I would like to inform you about the assessment methods whereby there are certain changes for the essay that you are supposed to write in pairs. Initially, the marks or the weightage was 20%, but based on the new course outline, the essay should be 30%. So as such, we are going to change the weightage for the essay to 30%. So instead of 1,000 words, I would have to increase the word count to 1,500 words for that essay. For the presentation and the poster, it will be 15% for each instead of 20% for each. And for the final assessment, since we cannot conduct centralized final exam, sit-down exam due to ERTL, we have to suffice with an open book exam. So that would 40% of the total marks for the assessment. Okay, I hope that is clear, inshallah. The nature of the assessment or the carry or the CAM remains the same. The essay, poster, and short video, that remains the same. And the topic or the task remains the same. Okay. Now we shall proceed with Ruwat. In our last class, we looked at Jarh Ta'dil, the science of Jarh Ta'dil, which basically deals with the credibility. So to Ruwat and Hadith, inshallah. Okay. So basically, deals with the indexes and biographical dictionaries of hadith transmitters. Sorry, we cannot play this game. If we were in class, we could have played this game of Chinese whispers or telephone game. It's a very interesting game. Unfortunately, we cannot do that because we don't have face-to-face classes. So before we dive into the topic, so Al-Bukhari, he reported, Imam Al-Bukhari reported that he heard Ali ibn al-Madini once said, "At-tafaqquh fi ma'ani al-hadith nisfu al-ilm." Understanding the meaning of the hadith is half of knowledge. Wa ma'rifatu rijal nisfu al-ilm. And the knowledge of the rijal, the knowledge of the transmitters, is the other part or the other half of knowledge. This is to signify the importance of recognizing the narrators, the narrators. And how do we do that? It is through ilm ruwat. So many scholars have written on ilm ruwat, and there are many genres of books pertaining to the science. So we have, for example, the Tabagāt Genre, which represents a biographical dictionary of early generations sorted based on cohorts, usually the list of narrators who received from the same teachers or informants or narrators who were of the same age group. So in Tabaqat al-Kubra, for example, by Ibn Sa'ad, he sorts out the narrators based on their cohorts. Either there were students of a particular teacher or they were of the same age group. And another example of Tabaqat genre is a Tabaqat by Khalifa ibn Khayyat. So basically, they arrange the transmitters, according to cohorts, and there will be details about these transmitters. And then we also have the Tawarikh genre. The Tawarikh genre. Yeah, so with the emergence of the Tasheeh movement, Tasheeh here is to authenticate. Yeah, so here with the emergence of the authentication movement, the Tawarikh genre, transmission of biography, was introduced. So the aim was to supply hadith evaluation activities with information on the narrators. Yeah, information on the narrators. Tarikh here is historical, so it will provide historical accounts of the narrators. So these are some examples: At-Tarikh by Yahya ibn Ma'in, and also At-Tarikh al-Kabir by Imam al-Bukhari, in which it is listed the names of the transmitters of hadith. And then we have the Thiqat genre, whereby in such books it is compiled the list of acceptable or trustworthy narrators. Yeah, but remember we mentioned before, if I'm not mistaken, in our last two classes when we looked at ijtihad in Khabar al-Ahad, when it comes to the trustworthiness and credibility of the transmitters, there might be also differences of opinion. And then we have the al-Du'afa genre. Yeah, so we have the Thiqat, acceptable, trustworthy genre. Now we have the Du'afa, which records or which compiles weak and discarded narrators. So those who are weak and discarded, they are included in this book or in this genre of book, which is known as the Du'afa. And then we also have Mu'ajam al-Sahabah, yeah, the Sahabah biographical dictionaries. So whereby it compiles the biographies of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all these types of genre would assist a scholar of hadith to identify the narrator and know more about the narrator, to then finally arrive to the conclusion in relation to the soundness of the hadith in question. And then we have the canonical Ruwat genre, which is an index of narrators' traits and specific canonical connections. Yeah. So in specific canonical collections of hadith, there would include in this type of genre the narrators of the hadith which is included in that particular canonical collection. And then we also have geo-biographical dictionaries, Tarikh al-Madinah as-Salam or Tarikh Dimashq, whereby it provides some backgrounds and information about narrators who come from certain areas. Yeah. And we also have the Nativity and Obituary indexes, yeah, Wafayat, for example here. Dictionary of narrators arranged based on the year of birth or the year of their demise. Yeah, so this is one way to check whether a chain of narration is actually connected or not, is by knowing the dates of birth and the date of deaths of narrators. So this would be useful in establishing that the chain is connected or not. And then we have the new Tabagāt Genre. Yeah, many compositions in Tabagāt were compiled. For example, the rank of scholars in the Shafi'i school of thought. So we have Tabagāt Fuqaha al-Shafi'iyya, or Tabagāt al-Hanabila, ranks of scholars in the Hanbali legal thought. So it lists down the scholars associated with that particular school of thought. Yeah, or Tabagāt al-Qura, ranks of Quranic reciters, Tabagāt Mufassirin, etc. So these are new genres of new Tabagāt genres. So do not worry too much about these. This is just to provide you with information in relation to Al-Ruwāt, yeah, what has been translated as the indexes and biographical dictionaries of hadith transmitters. So we have looked at some examples of these indexes and biographical dictionaries. Yeah, it comes in many forms. It comes in many forms. So now we shall move on to this, which is more important, which is the issue of paraphrasing hadith. Riwayah bil ma'na, yeah, a riwayah bil ma'na. So is it allowed for one to paraphrase hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? When it comes in the Quran, there is strict prohibition from doing so. You cannot paraphrase the Quran. The Quran must be transmitted and related and taught verbatim, yani, in the way it was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It cannot be paraphrased. But when it comes to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, generally, it is allowed to paraphrase. Yeah, it is allowed to paraphrase as long as it does not alter the meaning of that hadith. Okay, that is the general rule. We look at this in more detail, inshallah. So when we talk about paraphrasing hadith, the first important tool that one must be equipped with is the knowledge of the Arabic language, because how can you paraphrase a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ without knowing the language? So one must be familiar, must be acquainted with the Arabic language before one can engage in paraphrasing hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So here there is this hadith which is reported by Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and recorded in Al-Bukhari and Muslim, in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, insulting a Muslim is disobedience to Allah, and killing him is kufr. Yeah, so insulting a Muslim is a disobedient act, yeah, while killing him is kufr. So does this mean that if one commits murder of his fellow Muslim, then he or she would automatically become a kafir? Is this the case? So the word kufr here, those who are familiar with the Arabic language would know that it could mean disbelief or it could mean ingratitude. Yeah, it could mean disbelief or it could mean ingratitude. So in this case, in this hadith, most probably or most likely, the word kufr here would mean ingratitude rather than disbelief. And there is another hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, I was shown the hellfire, and the majority of its dwellers were women who were kufr. He was asked, do they commit kufr in Allah? He replied, they are kufr to their husbands and are ungrateful for the favors and the good charitable deeds done to them. If you have always been good, benevolent to one of them, and then she sees something in you not of her liking, she will say, I have never received any good from you. So here it mentions a kufr to husbands and for the favors which were bestowed upon them. So kufr here means ingratitude rather than disbelief. So one must be able to differentiate, yeah, because then one would arrive at the wrong meaning if you wrongly interpret a word, in even just a word, in this hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Having said that, the obsession with the problem of extreme obsession with meaning and the loss of forms. So I've also argued in my PhD thesis regarding form and substance, or form and meaning. Sometimes we give too much attention to the form of something that we often neglect the meaning or the substance underlying the form. And then there is also another extreme whereby one will concentrate on the form, on the substance and the meaning to the extent of disregarding or discarding the form. I don't know whether this example is suitable. For example, performing prayers, salah. So performing prayers, there are certain movements, and we all know what prayers is. It starts with takbir and ends with salam, and in between there is ruku', there is sujood, etc. Okay, but there is also a substance in prayer whereby salah is meant for us to make ourselves closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also salah is meant to prevent us from al-fahsha and al-munkar, from vices and from bad deeds. But to what extent does our salah actually serve that purpose? Yeah. So do we actually just perform salah outwardly without actually internalizing, the values which Islam promotes, and we forget that in salah we should strengthen our bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in various places in the Quran mentions that if we need help, wasta'inu bis-sabri wa salah, seek assistance with being patient and performing salah. So do we actually do that, or is just salah a set of movements which we do because we are told to do so? Yeah. So in this book, Sam Harris talks about waking up, a guide to spirituality without religion. Yeah. So he says that one can achieve spiritual bliss even without religion, meaning he's discarding religion, and he argues that he insists that spirituality remains the great whole in secularism, humanism, rationalism, and atheism. Scientific accounts of spiritual experience tend to either reduce them to pathologies or to compare them to the mild awe we might feel looking at the sunset. As a result, people who have ego-shattering spiritual experiences can only find a positive explanation in dogma of organized religions or in New Age quickly. Therefore, rationalists and the world at large needs a better science of spiritual experiences. So here Sam Harris is not discarding that underlying concept of spirituality. What he is questioning is that one can have, or a human being can be spiritual without being associated with any religion. Okay, so this is what he argues. And also in the past, we have Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, for example, talking about al-Batiniyah, al-Batiniyah, who also were concerned about substance, about meaning at the expense of the form. Yeah. So that is why the Batinites distinguish between an outer or exoteric zahir and inner esoteric batin, meaning Islamic scriptures. Yeah. And if you want further information about this, you may read up Fadaih al-Batiniyah, and there is even a translation by McCarthy. So we have that on one extreme, those who are obsessed with meaning, and now you have on the other extreme people who are obsessed with the form, and normally they are labeled as extreme literalists or extreme literalism. So as Islamic law is based on the central text of Islam, the idea of literal meaning that rules over human attempts to understand God's message has resulted in a series of debates among modern Muslim legal theorists. So this book traces the emergence and development of the idea of literal meaning in Islamic hermeneutics. So on one hand, we have those who focus on the outer or the form of certain aspects of the religion. And I always argue, for example, like in Islamic finance, this is an easy example that we see today. Without doubt, Islamic finance products and services, they are Sharia compliant, they comply to the Sharia. Although one might argue that the outcome or the effects of the contracts and the products and services offered are similar to that of conventional finance. So outwardly or in form, it does comply with Sharia requirements, but then when it comes to the substance, does it actually serve the maqasid, the underlying intent or purpose of the Sharia? That is another question which needs to be answered. So was a hadith transmitted? So hadith of the Prophet are hadith of the Prophet ﷺ transmitted verbatim, or were they paraphrased? So there are some arguments against paraphrasing. Yeah. So we have here Al-Bara, in which he narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said to him, whenever you go to bed, perform ablution like that for the prayer. Lie on your right side and say, Allahumma aslamtu wajhi ilayk, wa fawwadtu amri ilayk, wa laja'tu dhahri ilayk, raghabatan wa rahbatan ilayk, la malja'a wa la manja'a mink illa ilayk. Allahumma amantu bi kitabika alladhi anzalt, wa bi nabiyyika alladhi arsalt. Then if you die on that very night, you will die with faith. Let the aforesaid words be your last utterance. I repeated the prayer before the Prophet ﷺ when I reached Allahumma amantu bi kitabika alladhi anzalt. Oh, I believe in your book which you have revealed. Wa rasulika alladhi arsalt. And your apostle whom you sent. The Prophet ﷺ say, no, but say wa nabiyyika alladhi wa bi nabiyyika alladhi arsalt. So here the Prophet ﷺ apparently insisted that Al-Bara does not change the word Nabi with the word Rasul. Even though outwardly, or if we look at this hadith or with this dua, there seems to be no harm if we change the word Nabi here to Rasul. But here apparently the Prophet ﷺ prohibited Al-Bara to change the term Nabi with Rasul. So this is used as an argument against paraphrasing hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When it comes to the arguments approving paraphrasing, yeah, we have, for example, Zurarah bin Awfa, who said, I met several companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said they differed significantly in the wordings of the narrations, yet the narrations agreed on the same meaning. Yeah. So even the companions of the Prophet ﷺ differed in terms of the matan of the hadith. However, the meaning remains the same despite the differences in wordings. And when it comes to paraphrasing, Al-Hasan al-Basri uses the Quran itself, because he says that even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yeah, records the dialogues of the past nations. Yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them in the Quran and Allah paraphrases them. So then there should be no harm for doing so. And Ibn Mas'ud, Abu Darda and Anas bin Malik will say after their narrations, yeah, so Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Abu Darda and Anas bin Malik, when they narrate a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, they will often say, aw kama qal, or as the Prophet said, or nahwa hada, words similar to this, or wa shibhuhu, or similar to this, meaning that it might not have been the exact words of the Prophet ﷺ, it might not have been verbatim, but the meaning is still intact. Yeah, the meaning is still intact. So these are some of the arguments which support paraphrasing of hadith. Having said that, before approval of paraphrasing hadith, we must ensure that the narrator is knowledgeable in the language of the Arabs and their semantics. We mentioned just now in the beginning of the slides, yeah, the importance of the Arabic language. And secondly, the paraphrasing is not done purposefully, while the narrator still remembers accurately the words of the Prophet ﷺ. So it must not be done on purpose. Yeah, it must not be done on purpose. And we must ensure that when we are paraphrasing, we do not turn the haram into halal or vice versa. Yeah. And yes, yeah. one must not also paraphrase a hadith that was taken from a book, before the codification of hadith. So if one is transmitting a hadith which he or she finds in a book, he should transmit it. He or she should transmit it as it is found in the book. If he or she has access to the book at that time, rather than paraphrasing it. And the text is not related to any tawqifi issues or recitations in prayer. So this is another condition. So that is why, if we look at the hadith of Bara just now, whereby the Prophet ﷺ taught al-Bara dua, a form of supplication, it is best not to paraphrase. So here we have an example of paraphrasing hadith of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah makes radiant the face of a man who heard any of our words. Sami'a minna kalimatan. And here nadarallahu rajulan, makes radiant the face of a man. Here Allah makes, in another version, Allah makes radiant the face of a person, imra'an. Sami'a minna shay'an, who heard anything or who heard something. So the word rajul is being replaced by the word imra'an and kalimah with shay'an. But if one reads this hadith, there seems to be no alteration in meaning. And in another version, instead the word abdan is being used. And instead of kalimah, maqalati, our article, is being used. And in another version, instead of Allah makes radiant, the narrator uses the word Allah blesses. Rahimallahu man sami'a minna hadithan, who hears from us a hadith. Hadith here can mean a form of speech. So here are various versions of the same hadith, in which certain words, you can find different wordings in the different versions of the hadith, of the same hadith, which does not alter the meaning of this hadith. However, one must also be cognizant of the fact that we should not exploit paraphrasing. And this can also happen when one is trying to explain something to a period to which it does not belong. For example, the hadith attributed to Prophet ﷺ that he said, Al-Qadriya, the Qadarites and the Majus of my ummah. So it is not proper, even though one might want to explain a particular attribute, but then they do not use that attribute, rather they use a particular noun to point to a certain group. So the Prophet ﷺ could not have mentioned the Qadarites, because the Qadarites did not even exist during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So it is known that the proper name Qadarite was given to the sect by its opponent, and the emergence of this sect occurred only towards the end of the era of the companions. Either the Prophet ﷺ was addressing a proper name that really appeared after his demise, or is it possible that the original text reads, those who do not believe in Qadar are similar to the Majus. So the original text is that those people who do not believe in Qadar are similar to the Majus. So paraphrasing this hadith, because this is an attribute connected or linked with the Qadarites, this should not be the case. This should not be done. We should mention the attribute rather than the group. Hence, the later transmission of this text, which postdate the appearance of the proper name Al-Qadriya, paraphrased it using the recently introduced proper name. So it is recent. It is recent in that sense. So one should not do that. So the Prophet ﷺ, we find certain attributes, and there are certain groups of, for example, seculars or liberals. The Prophet ﷺ did not use such terms. There might be certain attributes which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in this hadith, and these attributes might be present in certain groups that we find today, modern groups, but then we should not paraphrase the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ to say that Prophet ﷺ said the seculars or the liberals. No. So one should not exploit, paraphrasing of hadith. Ibn Sirin reported that some persons stated with a sense of pride, and some merely discussed whether there would be more men in paradise or more women. They went to ask Abu Hurairah. Was upon this Abu Hurairah reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, the members of the first group to get into paradise would have their faces as bright as full moon during the night. And the next to this group would have their faces as bright as the shining stars in the sky. And every person would have two wives, and the marrow of their shanks would glimmer beneath the flesh, and there would be none without a wife in paradise. Yeah. So here, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was addressing people who were proud because they said there would be more men in paradise. But then Abu Hurairah argued that on the basis of another hadith, there would be more women in paradise. Why? Because a man would have two wives in paradise. Yeah, every person would have two wives. So if there are 10 men and each of these 10 men have two wives, then there will be 20 women, meaning there will be more women in paradise. So while commenting on the previous hadith, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said, however, this hadith contradicts the hadith on Kusuf that says, I saw you, O woman, the majority of the dwellers in the hellfire. This can be reconciled by taking that it is not necessary that being a majority in the hellfire denies being a majority in paradise. True. So if there is a hadith which mentions that the majority of the denizens of hell are women, that does not negate the probability that the majority of the dwellers of paradise, there might be also women. The hadith nevertheless contradicts another hadith that says, I gazed at the paradise and found that the minority of its dwellers are women. Upon this, Ibn Hajar stated, it is possible that the narrator of these words paraphrased it based on his assumption that being a majority in the hellfire entails being a minority in the paradise. That is, however, not necessarily true on the basis of our previous explanation. Yeah. So one must be also cautious when paraphrasing, as not to make certain assumptions. So here, Ibn Hajar argues that the hadith in which it says that the minority of the dwellers of paradise are women, this is an assumption made by a narrator based on the hadith which says that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire are women. Okay, I think this is quite clear. So make sure we do not infuse our assumptions when we paraphrase hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is a book about الرواية بالمعنى في الحديث النبوي وأثارها في الفقه الإسلامي, paraphrasing in hadith and its effect on Islamic jurisprudence. Yes, because in Islamic jurisprudence, every word counts actually, and if there are various versions of a hadith, various words are being used in these various versions, it might lead to different conclusions on a particular hukum, on a particular ruling, and this indeed has an effect on fiqh. So I'm not sure whether this book has been translated or not, but yes, there might be cases in which paraphrasing of hadith has an effect on the outcome or on certain matters of jurisprudence. Okay, so that is ilmu Ruwāt and also Riwayah bil ma'na. I hope you have benefited from this live lecture. If there are any issues which require further clarification, please do not hesitate to ask via the various platforms that we have be it YouTube, or comments on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, or even via our WhatsApp group. I apologize again for not being able to live stream this live lecture on YouTube. But I hope those who are watching on Twitter and Facebook are able to do so, inshallah. I will upload this video on YouTube soon, inshallah, bismillah ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم. Stay safe, everyone.